Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Peterson, and our scripture this morning is from Luke 10:38 through 42. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her."
It's a well-known story. I mean, almost even this archetype that we refer to people as Marys or Marthas as if it is a personality type, you know? Just a few weeks ago, I had the chance to go to Haiti with my wife, Jamelyn, and we went to attend the funeral of a dear friend of ours named Sine. Sine has two daughters who lived in Fondwa, who are good friends of ours, Krishna and Jezela. And Krishna and Jezela fall into this pattern. Jezela is the more social person, loves to visit, with people. Krishna is the worker bee type, much more comfortable doing a task than just sitting and talking with people. So, when we arrived in Fondwa, we went to their house to kind of, share our condolences with them. And as we did so, first we got to the house, Jezela was at the house, and she was receiving all the neighbors and guests who were coming to pay their respects and offer support for the family. But Krishna wasn't there. And so we left the house, got on the road, and then we saw Krishna coming down the road. And true to form, she was carrying like armloads of shovels and pickaxes. Workers had been using them to prepare the burial site for her father. And so we stopped her in the road and we talked to her a few moments and shared our sympathy. And she teared up just a little bit. But the emotion she expressed in that moment wasn't her sadness. Instead, what she expressed was her weariness and her frustration, because she said, my sister, gosh, I wish she would help me. She's been at the house all day while I've been running around making everything happen. And Jalen and I turned to ourselves as we walked away and we said, that was a Mary and Martha moment, if ever we have seen one. I think all of us, on some level, can identify with Martha, because every single one of us at some point has had the experience of carrying the load, of being the one to scurry around making stuff happen while other people sit and enjoy the grace of relaxing and visiting with others. And probably all of us in those moments in our hearts have offered a prayer very similar to Martha's, where it's been something like, Jesus, can't you make other people share the load with us? Can't you make them carry their fair share? Or to be honest, let's be real. Sometimes we don't really want their help because it's better if we just do it ourselves, but we at least want Jesus to respond and say something like, don't we wish he would say to Martha, Martha, I see everything you're doing, and I want you to know it's appreciated. I wish your sister was more like you. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly what Martha was hoping to hear, but the reality is whatever she was hoping or expecting Jesus to do, he did not meet those expectations. He didn't offer her any praise. He didn't rebuke her sister. Instead, what Jesus did is what Jesus sees so often. Instead of responding to the complaint, he responded to the condition underneath the complaint. The condition of worry and anxiety that created Martha's frustration. He says to her, Martha, Martha, you were so worried and distracted by many things. You see, Jesus sees, he knows that this worry, this condition, is not just robbing Martha of the present moment of his visit, but it's robbing her of her life as well. We're in the third week of our series on seeking wellness. And what we've been talking about is how to seek Jesus' presence and healing, particularly when we deal with difficult emotions like anxiety and worry or fear and anger or shame. And what we've been talking about is that all these emotions are actually good. I mean, it's how God wired us, and each of them serves a purpose. The challenge is when an emotion kind of comes to dominate our lives, when it colors everything we see, feel, experience. That's when we need to seek God's healing. And if there's any emotion that seems to be taking over our world, it's the emotion of anxiety. I mean, psychologists, they tell us that all the markers of stress and anxiety-related disorders are on the rise. They tell us that this generation that's coming up now is the most anxious generation in the history of the world. And they were saying that before COVID hit. COVID's probably even ramped that up even more. So what is anxiety? Well, author Mark Baker, he defines anxiety as the body's way of signaling and anticipating stress. It's the feeling we get before there's a big test or before there's a big project. And anxiety kind of helps us. It signals us to marshal our resources and to attend and focus in on the thing that really matters most. And so anxiety isn't bad. We can feel anxiety even before good things, like the birth of a child or before a wedding even. Think about that bride in 16 Candles, the older sister who takes all those muscle relaxers. And when she takes all those muscle relaxers, she loses all anxiety. Like she is completely loopy and out there. But without anxiety, it's not a good thing because she can't attend to what's most important. She can't respond accordingly. Sadly, as a pastor, I've sometimes done weddings where either the bride or the groom has self-medicated in some way to deal with their anxiety, but to the point where the anxiety is gone. And that is not the goal. Please hear this. I don't think God's goal for us as human beings is for us to live a life without anxiety. Maybe if you're the dude in the Big Lebowski, that's the only person I know of that could make that their goal, to live without anxiety. If you just want to abide like the dude, sure. But the rest of us, we're meant and called by God to live lives of purpose and passion and calling. And if we pursue a meaningful life, we are inevitably going to experience and feel anxiety, because that's what meaningful activity does. Hans Selye, who's a world-renowned expert on stress, he defines stress as the byproduct of meaningful activity. So anytime we're engaged in activity that's important, we're going to experience stress. The problem isn't stress. I mean, stress just means that it just points to the fact that we're living in a meaningful life. The problem is overstress, because Hans Selye says whenever we experience a period of stress, what needs to follow is experience of release. When the tension can be gone, when we can uncoil and relax and kind of regather our energy and our well-being. Mark Baker, the book I mentioned earlier, he kind of references golfers as an example of this. He says, professional golfers, they are under incredible stress. Every time they stand over a ball, all their focus, all their attention riding on each swing. And yet in between swings, the best golfers have found ways of releasing that stress, of letting go. I recently watched the documentary that's out on Tiger Woods, and as I watched that, I thought, that's a picture of someone who is under constant stress without any healthy release. So a healthy pattern of stress looks like this, that there is an activity that comes and produces stress, but then after that comes a release. The problem for many of us is that we never enter into that release. As soon as we finish one activity, we start the next, and we are constantly behind, constantly, kind of on the hamster wheel, so to speak. And in that case, the stress cycle shifts, Instead of being activity, stress, release, it becomes activity, stress, distress. And distress is not good. It breaks down our bodies and our minds over time. Distress produces a feeling of constant anxiety, a feeling of constantly being under attack or under threat. And this constant anxiety drives us into unhealthy behaviors. At first, the unhealthy behavior of control. The feeling that we have to control everything that's happening around us and the people who live around us because they're the X factors, right? There's this old saying that goes, those who are out of control of themselves try to control everything else going on around them. And in extreme cases, this need for control can even manifest itself as obsessive compulsive disorder. The feeling that if you just do certain patterns and certain habits, that those give that feeling of control and therefore give a illusion of release. It's not really release, it's just a momentary relief, because then you have to do it all over again. So the first unhealthy behavior that we're all part of is that need for control. And then out of control comes hurry, because that just speeds our lives up. It's that feeling that if we just move fast enough, we can keep all the plates spinning in the air and none will fall down. But the thing is the faster and faster and faster we move, the more it keeps us from entering into rest and relationship, and those are the things that make life truly rich. And then after hurry, I think of worry, which just happens to rhyme, I guess. But there's a connection between the two, isn't there? Dr. Baker, he says worry is the strategy we have for dealing with anxiety when we don't know what else to do. We worry about things as an illusion of doing something about a problem that we actually can't do anything about. So Dr. Baker suggests that whenever we're experiencing worry, a good question for us to ask ourselves is, am I feeling powerless in the moment? Because often that's what's driving our experience of worry, this feeling of being out of control, of not being able to make meaningful change in a situation. Are the things that you're worried about, is it your powerlessness that's driving them? And the irony is that worry doesn't add anything. It may make us feel like we're doing something, but it doesn't. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, asked the question, can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? It's a rhetorical question, and the answer is no. Worry doesn't add anything. In fact, it subtracts. So just quick recap. So anxiety is supposed to signal our body to be part of living a life of meaning and purpose, right? But when anxiety takes over, it does the exact opposite. It keeps us from living lives of purpose and power and meaning. It disconnects us from those around us. And this is what's happening for Martha back in our biblical story. She invited Jesus into her home. She opened her house. And in this act of hospitality, it's a good thing. I mean, this is a moment that she gets an experience of being able to welcome and receive the Son of God, her rabbi, her teacher, the one she loves. And yet she is so consumed with making this moment perfect that she's running and scurrying around and she's unable to do the thing that is most needed in that moment, which is to attend to the relationship with the one who is the guest in her home. It's what Mary is doing. But Martha in that moment only feels anger. Anger, not just at herself, but anger at her sister who's not helping her, not helping her get food to the table, or whatever she needs to be doing. So she complains to Jesus. But Jesus knows that her sister is not Martha's problem, and nor will it solve the root of her worry. Jesus, the master diagnostician, the healer of the soul, does two things instead. The first thing he does is he tells Martha, I see you. Remember, Martha's words to Jesus, the first four words are, Lord, don't you care that my sister's not helping? Lord, don't you care? And Jesus responds, Martha, Martha. He says her name twice as a way of communicating, I see you and I do care. I know that many things are worrying you, distracting, upsetting you. Hey, Jesus knows that it's not just his visit which is distracting and upsetting Martha. That likely in her life she has an ongoing pattern of distress. And maybe one of the things that's distressing her is her brother's health, Lazarus. We know from John's gospel that he will soon after this visit pass away. So maybe that's where Martha's feeling powerless. Maybe that's what's driving her worry. But regardless, Jesus communicates, before he communicates anything else, I see what's going on. And it might be that that's what you need at home this morning. If you're consumed with worry or anxiety, maybe you just need to be reminded that Jesus sees, he knows, and he cares about what's going on because he cares about you. But here's the second thing Jesus does. Because even though Jesus sees what's happening with Martha and communicates that, he doesn't validate the way she's living. He doesn't say this is a good pattern for life. Instead, he points her to a better way of living. He says, you're worried about so many things, you're distracted by them, but only a few things are necessary. Indeed, only one thing is necessary. And your sister has chosen it. He helps Martha attend to what the most important thing is, which is connection. To sit and listen at Jesus' feet. That's what's most necessary. I mean, that's the antidote to anxiety, is connection. Of knowing that there are people around you who can help carry the load, but also knowing there are people around you with whom you can experience release, with whom you can be off the clock, from whom you can receive friendship and love without the need to earn those kinds of things. So I just want to ask you, when was the last time you were off the clock? When was the last time you released your stress, your anxiety? When was the last time you were Mary, sitting at Jesus' feet? And I know that's really challenging for a lot of us, because we kind of look at Mary and we go, but I can't do that, because if I do that, then all these other things happen. I mean, what if all the plates fall? What if the world spins apart? That what if, that's the mantra, I think, of hurry, worry, and control. But what if? What if God loves you regardless of your performance? What if God will provide for you in ways that don't always have to come from you? What if we trusted that God already knows everything we need, and God is capable of providing them every moment we need them? What if we trusted and just sat at Jesus' feet? The choir is going to sing a song for us. It's an uplifting song with djembe and a ukulele, but I encourage you, as you listen to this song, feel your spirit lifted and let go of whatever you may be worrying about in order to just sit at Jesus' feet. Well, as we've been able to do each week in the Seeking Wellness series, we have a little bit of time for conversation with Pastor Kim King, who's our newest member of our pastoral team on Sunday mornings, is also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so thanks, Kim, for being with us. We're pre-recording this because on Saturday, Kim is going to receive her second COVID shot. And we just wanted to be sure that, in case side effects or whatever, that she wouldn't leave us in the lurch on Sunday. So we're pre-recording this week, but thanks, Kim, for being here. And today's topic is anxiety. And I'm sure in your practice you work with a lot of people who are struggling with anxiety. So what do you see happening with anxiety in our culture and world today?
Yeah, well, I want to say, everyone experiences anxiety. We're all under stress at some point or another, and anxiety is just the response to that. Anxiety is the most widely diagnosed mental illness. I worked in a university counseling center, right? And I would say 4 out of 5 students would come into my office and say, "Oh, I've always experienced anxiety," and I was like, "No, you have not. You did not get here with anxiety." So it's widely diagnosed, widely experienced.
Right.
I think 42% of college students that come in for treatment are experiencing anxiety.
Yeah, and so it's like this dual message of like, one, if you're experiencing anxiety, we want to normalize it, like you're not alone.
Right.
But it's also, as you're saying, to some of these, there is a sense in which it becomes so normal that we get used to carrying anxiety as if that's how we're supposed to be, but that's not how we're wired.
No, and not to be overly anxious. I mean, anxiety can be good. Like, it can help you get your homework done. It can help you jump out of the way of a moving car. So
Right.
we need to, experience some anxiety. But when we experience too much and it impacts our daily, comings and goings, then we need to seek some treatment.
So from your perspective, if anxiety is on the rise in our culture, what are the things that are driving that are making people feel more anxious today compared to, a generation before?
Yeah, I mean, everyone is so busy. I mean, how you doing? Oh, I'm busy, right?
Right,
So
busy's the new
all
fine,
busyness, yeah. I mean, kids are over-involved or, highly involved in extracurricular. I think that there's sort of this culture of perfectionism, especially among adolescents and young adults, like the process for getting into college. I listened this morning to a story, and this senior or junior in high school wrote 90 essays as part of her college application process. So
I can tell you, I'm there. Like, my daughter's in 9th grade.
Yeah.
And she's a good student, and yet she feels anxiety. Like, even some of her 8th grade classes counted on her high school GPA. And so she's in 8th grade worrying about grades because it's going to impact her college admission someday. And maybe that was true when I was a kid, but I don't remember the pressure of it. Like, it was like I wanted good grades, but I didn't feel the pressure of my future hanging on that.
Yeah, and in addition to that, they've got to volunteer, they've got to be involved in some art or sport or something. So that's a lot of pressure.
So we have busyness, that pressure to perform, to be perfect. Social media has to play a role in this too, right?
I think so. Measuring your worthiness by the number of likes that you get, or, comparing yourself to someone else's post, which is probably
comparison is huge, right?
Because you're comparing to what people want you to see, not necessarily what is, but you're comparing that to what is with you. So it's like all my inside messiness to your outside perfection.
We were talking about this with Zoom, right? Zoom, I think, is even making this worse because when we interact with people by Zoom, we just see this little screen. And inside that screen, like, everything looks clean or orderly. Like, some people even put these nice backgrounds behind them, and they're dressed, underneath they could be in underpants or whatever.
We've seen those commercials.
Yeah, but you don't see that. It's just, that's kind of a metaphor, I think, today of how comparison works. It's the same way. Like,
absolutely.
We just see what people project, what they want us to see, but not necessarily the confusion and mess inside. So that comparison gets real tough. So we got busyness, pressure to perform, social media. I think social media too, especially when we look at what's happening with politics and driving arguments and conflict in our world, does that play a role?
Yeah, and if you are a news junkie, which I can be from time to time, and you're getting push notices, so you're not asking for this bombardment of news, but you're getting it pushed out to you all the time. And it's loaded with opinion and divisiveness, and so that can heighten your anxiety.
Well, Grace Gogas, who spoke earlier in the service, she kind of articulated this as that youth today, they are getting bombarded with this news at the same time they're opening their lunchbox or sitting in conversation. Like, it just comes. So,
and if you got the watch, you got it coming across your wrist. All the time.
There's no escaping. So there's a lot pushing anxiety in our world. I'm just curious, so we're describing the water we're all drowning in, but what's the lifesaver? Like, how do we pull ourselves out of anxiety if we're struggling with it?
Yeah, so the best news is that it's highly treatable. Anxiety is probably the most treatable disorder. So talk therapy, medication, exercise, mindfulness, eating properly. There's so many things you can do to lessen your anxiety.
I want to jump back to medication. You said a lot of things that I think are helpful. There's a stigma around medication. So say a little bit about what medication does and is and how it helps.
Yeah, I like to start with just helping people. This probably sounds just a little cliche, but if you were told you had diabetes, you wouldn't be like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not taking the medicine for that. I'm just like gonna...
It wouldn't be a moral failing.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a weakness,
Yeah, but people have this idea about medications for mental illness that they are really reluctant to try them. So I usually ask people I tell people that it isn't a lifetime sentence of being on the medication necessarily, that you might just need something to get you stabilized. And then after you're on it for the period of time, suggested by your physician, you might be able to wean off of the medication, stop it altogether because you've improved your coping skills. So the medication is going to help you get to a place where you can work on all these interventions that will help your anxiety. And so once you have an opportunity to learn and master those interventions, you may be able to come completely off the medication.
Yeah. So we talked about medication. Let's talk about some of those other things: exercise, diet, mindfulness. Like, what are some of the practices that you've seen be really helpful for people?
So I like to give people things that they can do when they're in a crowd, because you're usually not the most anxious when you're by yourself. So say you're in class or you're sitting in a meeting and you're feeling pretty anxious. Start counting backwards by 3 or 4 or 7 from 100, right?
Oh, so like 193, 86, like
yeah,
that gets
right.
kind
You
of
have
hard.
Exactly. But what that does is when you're anxious, most of the blood in your brain is going to your brainstem because
like
your
fight or
body
flight,
feels like it's in danger, right? And your brain is going to shut off so that you can only do those 3 things that will save your life. Physiologically, that's what's happening, right? But if I start counting backward from 100, I have to squint and like some blood goes back up here to my frontal cortex, and it lowers my anxiety.
Huh.
Yeah, or you could pick out everything green in the room, but something that's going to turn the logic part of your brain back on.
Huh. Well, that's helpful. I never knew that. Mm-hmm. But what if we're not the ones who are anxious, but we're with someone who is really anxious, or maybe even having a panic attack? Like, what's helpful in those moments to do with someone who's anxious?
I think just acknowledge that you see how anxious they are. Because most people who are highly anxious understand that the thing that they're worried about is probably pretty irrational, but it still exists for them.
Right.
So to just acknowledge.
So rationalizing it doesn't help. Mm-hmm. Like, you have no reason to worry.
Right. That's not helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, that's not helpful. Yeah, I see you, can you talk to me about it? Tell me what's happening. How can I be helpful? Again, you're asking questions that a person has to think about, right?
So it does that same blood flow thing of moving. Yeah. Well, so the last thing we wanted to talk about, and this is something we've done each week in the series, is talk about a spiritual practice. Something we can do to not just to manage an emotion, but to connect with God and to seek God's healing. And so kind of going back to our biblical story, which Jesus said Mary chose the best thing, which was sitting at his feet.
Yeah.
And so for this week, we wanted to focus on mindfulness. So say a little bit about what mindfulness is.
So mindfulness really is simply staying in the moment. When we live in the past and we're worried about the thing that we did that didn't quite turn out right, that can cause us to be depressed. And when we live in the future, worried about what's going to happen next, that can cause a lot of anxiety. And so mindfulness is really just bringing your attention to the current moment, what's happening right now. So if you can get quiet and just focus on what's happening now, and when those thoughts come, just sort of let them go. You don't have to, like I said, hold on lightly, because if you hold on like this, you keep things from coming in or going out. But if you can hold on like this, you might get a gift.
Right. Yeah, when I was in college, I had to take this class on Zen Buddhism. It was a required class to take a non-Western religion in my college curriculum, and so I chose Buddhism. But I remember one of the things that they talked about was attachment, and kind of Buddhist thought was that attachment leads to suffering. But I think the same thing, attachment leads to anxiety.
Yeah.
Like if we are trying to control and we're attached to a certain outcome or whatever, then we get more anxious. But what you're talking about, that open-handedness of it's not detached like in terms of apathy, but it is not holding on and not being afraid. Like, I think sometimes when we try to block out thoughts or feelings, we actually make them bigger.
Yeah.
Scarier.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we're, it's more just about welcoming what comes and then letting it.
Yeah, with gratitude, whether it's positive or negative, just welcome it with gratitude and let it go with gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and last thing about this is, with any spiritual practice, it takes practice. That's why the word is there, right?
Yeah.
Like, first time you try this mindfulness, like you're probably going to really struggle.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's something you just. I try to say to people, focus on their breathing.
Mm-hmm. That's a great one.
Focus on your posture. Mm-hmm. Don't slump, but just sit up.
Yeah.
Get comfortable and
just the chair underneath you and underneath the floor underneath your feet.
Yeah.
Try to get you. Yeah, ground yourself.
Just ground yourself, and then just in and out, big deep breaths. And sometimes I know people do mantras, like they breathe in, they choose a word to breathe in, choose a word to breathe out.
Breathe in peace and breathe out anxiety. Just breathe in peace. Breathe out your anxiety. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And feel yourself relaxing.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, David.
We're going to go into communion now, but thanks for sharing with us
Thanks
this
for
wonderful
having me.
wisdom.